Bridgewater Associates founder Ray Dalio posting on LinkedIn and weighing in on tariffs. He says it's more important to focus on the idea that, quote, we're seeing a classic breakdown of the major monetary, political, and geopolitical orders. This sort of breakdown occurs only about once in a lifetime, but they have happened many times in history when similar unsustainable conditions were in place. Joining us right now, first on CNBC, is Bridgewater founder Ray Dalio, and we're thrilled to have you here on a morning when we're still trying to make sense of what all these tariffs mean, Ray, and frankly, how all of this plays out. So to the extent that you can help us with the history, or at least a history lesson, if you think there are parallels, how does this play out?
Good to see you, Joe. Andrew, Joe, and Becky. I think that we don't understand how the cycle goes because it comes along about once in a lifetime. But there are orders, there are systems. And the systems break down for certain reasons, and it creates cycles. For example, there's a monetary system, and then there's a debt cycle. And so as a result, we now have, one man's debts, another man's assets. And when you build these up and you get to a point where you can't sustain that, you have a debt issue. We have a debt issue. We can get into that, but there's a monetary cycle. There's a internal political order cycle that takes us from one political order to another political order, in which there's then classically great turbulence between the left and the right. And because of disorder, particularly in democracies, there's a lot of fighting because there needs to be cooperation, compromise, and so on. And we're in the process of changing that order. In addition, we have the international world order. International world order began in 1945. There's a war. You win a war. The dominant powers get to set the rules. That was a series of multilateralism, things like the United Nations World Trade Organization, World This and World That. And that multilateralism is then breaking down for unilateralism for the same reasons. So there are these three orders related to too much debt. Debt is money. Second, internal order. How does our system work? Who's going to get control of this problem? And then number three, in addition of the five main forces, there's also throughout history, climate, acts of nature. Droughts, floods, and pandemics have killed more people and toppled more orders. And then there's also throughout history, man's inventiveness and new technologies, which is creating this transformative result.
Right.
The interactions of these is what's going on. So if we look at tariffs represent a dealing with the imbalances. The imbalance means we have a tremendous capital imbalance and a tremendous trade imbalance, which is unsustainable. And so that's the backdrop of this. Related to that is also the international conflict. How do you have dependency, mutual dependency? How can the United States be a safe country and not manufacture things and have to import them for China? Or how can China be safe in terms of having capital, an American capital? Those connections are breaking down. So that's the essence of the backdrop. When we get into the tariffs, I'm sure we'll get into it.
Well,
but that's
Ray, that's a great backdrop to understand the way you're thinking about it contextually. But let's go straight to the tariffs, which is to say, how do you think, therefore, they play out? Is there, given the history that you talk about, is there the political appeal, either here in the U.S. or elsewhere, for these tariffs ultimately? And from an economic perspective, as we're all watching the market today, it's gotten a little bit better. But obviously, folks have lost 10%. Someone said to me last week, this is like a wealth tax, except that nobody gets the money. In that, 10% of a lot of folks' wealth vanished overnight as a function of at least this discussion thus far. So what happens?
Well, mechanistically, it raises costs. It lowers revenues for companies. I mean, what does it mean for a company? It means costs are going to go up. revenue is going to go down, and capital is going to be harder to come by. And so, and then we're trying to replace manufacturing. I mean, I agree with the problems, okay, about the fact that we don't manufacture and that there is a problem with that. But there's a structural problem of whether we can manufacture. We have a population that basically 3 million people, 1% of the population, is incredibly brilliant. I mean, they go to the best schools, they come out, they make the unicorns, inventiveness, half of which, by the way, are foreigners. And at the same time, they are making the unicorns. At the same time, what we have is 10% of the population around them that's doing very well. The 60% of the population has below a 6th grade reading level. And it's tough to be productive. So when we agree with the problem, too much debt, Secretary Benevesett and others agree we should get it down to 3%. We have to get the budget deficits down to 3% of GDP. This is not, we all agree on the problem. The question is, what do we do about it? How do you create that self-sufficiency? And so from a practical point of view, that manufacturing is very difficult under this sort of circumstances to create within the United States, yet it's needed.
So therefore, you agree with the president? You disagree with the president? I'm trying to understand what the conclusion is here. If the president is watching you right now, if Scott Bessent is watching you right now, you're telling him what? This is a good idea? You're telling him abandon this idea? What are you saying?
I agree with the problem, okay? I am very concerned about the solution, okay? The practicality of the solution. In other words, I think that this is going to create not only the problem, the capital markets problem that I'm talking about related to prices going up, costs going up, prices, revenue going down, and capital problem. But I also think that this is going to create great sand in the gears of production worldwide. At the same time, I do agree that this interdependency, this issue of productivity in the world in which we have to be competitive and productive, and we're not competitive in producing things, is a longer-term problem, not an easy one. And I do expect that it is going to have political consequences. This is the nature of the cycle. It is coming also at the same time as we have a budget issue. Now, the budget issue is a comparably important issue. So as we look ahead in the months ahead, we have to get the budget deficit down to 3% of GDP. I worry about that at the same time as this is happening. These are not easy problems to solve, I'm concerned, because the bigger problems exist. The debt exists. You can't get around the debt. The overspending exists. You still have that. You still have that competitiveness issue. These have repeated throughout history. We're in a period that's very much like the 1930s.